Welcome back to Previously Prohibited. I'm Jenin Eunice, and I'm here with Melissa Whitty again, and it's almost Christmas, so it's very exciting, as you can see. Yeah, Melissa has all her gear on. So we have a most ridiculous tweet of the day. I'm not exactly sure what to call it. I would just like to say stupidest tweet of the day, but so there was an article that came out in Haaretz today, today or yesterday, and that's an Israeli newspaper. It's kind of like the Israeli paper of record, and it documented a lot of the most heinous crimes that IDF soldiers had committed. The context is that it was actually written by a psychologist who treats a lot of IDF soldiers who have some kind of PTSD or whatever from having served in the army. And included in what some of them recounted were breaking a 4-year-old child's arms and legs because the Palestinians have to be exterminated and you have to kill the kids too. Kicking a woman so hard she was unable to have children in the future. Shooting a 25-year-old man, I believe, in the back, and then claiming self-defense and somehow getting away with that claim. It's the article's making the rounds, and I think even some of the most staunch Israel defenders are having to contend with it because it is an Israeli paper. It's considered fairly reliable, and it seems to be sourced reports from people who've actually witnessed these events. So one of the most insane takes I saw today was what's really interesting about this piece is that it shows that the Israeli side is the only side capable of self-reflection and accountability, something foreign to the anti-war / pro-Palestinian alliance. Okay, that's just insane. I don't even know where to start. Melissa, go for it.
So this Anon is he's a real piece of work. He's got about I think like 20 something thousand followers.
Yeah.
He loves to troll my posts. There's something about a blonde woman with no actual like familial ties to the region taking the side of the Palestinians that really just gets under these people's skin. And so for whatever reason, they love to target me, whatever.
I think it's because you're demographically someone they think should be on their side. So it really bugs them when it turns out that...
Yeah, and it should, because, again, when they lose the ones like me, their time is short.
Yeah.
That guy is insane. And what's also interesting is that, there's the whole piece is written from anonymous accounts. Of course, nobody is actually named in it and whatnot. So no one's actually taking any responsibility. They're basically just, and it's actually written from in my opinion, it's written from a standpoint of look at what this does to us, not look at the harm that we inflicted on others. You know, it's how do these demonic actions how do they weigh on our soldiers? And, which obviously there is some room for reflection on that, but I would hardly label that as taking responsibility or reflection. It's how can we torture these people without it hurting our souls?
And I mean, the craziest thing about it is in the context of the most recent war in Gaza, they've been doing this for now like 15 months. There's been so much evidence of the heinousness of the war crimes that have occurred. There have been many accounts of children being shot in the head from the New York Times and other sources that, tend to be fairly reliable on such subjects. And that was also based on a report in which they interviewed dozens of doctors and nurses who had served in Gaza. There's no question about the brutality of what's happened. And then if you look at, what happened preceding October 2023 and the way that Israel has treated the Palestinians, it's also been heinous. It's just that now they're confronted with a report that they absolutely cannot completely discredit. I mean, they usually just deny and say it's, Pallywood or whatever. So now this is the latest form of trying to, it's completely insane. There has been no accountability for 75 years. So that's
right. And, something else that's really unfortunate, and we've seen this here with our own American troops. Of course, I talk about I live right next to Fort Bragg, and I always have. And, you see this with soldiers having serious incidences, domestic instances especially. They come home with this PTSD, with this kind of like shell shock, and it wears on men. It does. And when you do these heinous things, men of conscience cannot simply just walk away, right? That actually is a feature of a sociopath. Normal people who are not sociopaths, they carry it with them. And I've said this from the beginning, that you cannot let your people get away with this, because it doesn't go away. Right? These men have to carry this into their homes. They carry it into their workplaces. And Israel is exceptionally different than the U.S. in that such a large percentage of their population serves in the IDF. So they have to deal with this. Because it's compulsory,
right?
Right.
Except unless you're extremely religious, I think.
Yeah. So I think it's like, but those people have their own issues. I don't even. I don't actually get too much into like domestic issues, but I actually do kind of sympathize with the non-religious Israelis, and that I feel like the religious ones kind of do get away with a lot. But that's their own domestic issue. It doesn't really actually have anything to do with us. But so I reserve commentary. But so I think so. This is the second or third, I believe, because CNN ran a piece. I think it was back in. I don't know, it was maybe September, October, about these all these suicides that they were having after of these reservists who whenever the reservists were getting called back, they were like committing suicide. And they talked to one of the soldiers who was the best friend of a guy who had committed suicide, and he was a bulldoze operator, and his account was so graphic and so like just unbelievably, like something, not even out of a horror story. They're talking about rolling over people with their bulldozers and their guts just, and hundreds of people like this. How people deal with that. I don't know how you forget something like that. And of course, this, I believe that the article said that there had been 9 bulldoze operators who had committed suicide since the war began. And which, might not sound like that many, but it actually is a lot.
It's a pretty high number, yeah.
Right,
yeah.
And that's just in that one specialty in their military. And so, and the one guy said, he had the buddy of the guy who committed suicide said he couldn't sleep. Said every time he closed his eyes, he saw these people getting ran over. It was very traumatic, These are cries for help from their, and what you see from a lot of the sycophants online is they want to deny that this CNN is lying, because they don't want to have to deal with that, right?
Right. Well, that's why I think this one is different, because it comes from an Israeli paper, so they can't totally deny it. And that's why they're going to these ridiculous justifications, like, oh, this just shows that they, they're better than the Palestinians because they take accountability for their actions. Like, the lack of logic underlying that is just beyond the pale. And then there have also been recent reports that the corpses of Palestinians in Gaza are being eaten by cats and dogs. Because nobody can remove them because they're too afraid of being killed, and there's so many, they're just piling up and being eaten by pets, and there are videos circulating of it, which are just so
it's dystopian. It's
out of a horror movie is the only way to put it, I think.
But even just like the worst kind of horror movie, the kind where nobody even would ever watch because it's just so grotesque and so unworldly, So it's pretty depressing stuff.
It is. And speaking of depressing, one of the most interesting incidents of the week, and obviously horrific for the victims and their families, and our hearts are with them. In Germany, a man, we'll just start by calling him a man, drove a car into a crowd of people who were shopping in a Christmas market, which if you've ever been to a Christmas market in Germany, or in Europe, it's very like charming, quaint, beautiful, happy event. And so, the tragedy is even more compounded by the fact, such an innocent situation became so horrific, and a number of people were died. I think maybe 5 so far, and quite a few were injured. Yeah. So obviously a horrible event. Nobody is disputing that. it turned out that the man was Saudi Arabian, had come from Saudi Arabia. And this, of course, led to all of the extremely pro-Israel people on Twitter to immediately jump to the conclusion that this was Islamic terrorism and it's proof that Muslims are bad. And of course, ties into the whole, this is what we have to deal with in Israel. And so therefore, what we're doing in Gaza is okay. That's how these events are always used. Well, it actually turned out, at a closer look of his Twitter account, that he was an atheist, extremely anti-Muslim and Zionist. And he had come to Saudi Arabia. He was a psychiatrist too. And I mean, I suspect probably not the most mentally stable person in the world. That's usually what happens. Had worked with women who were trying to get out of Saudi Arabia because the conditions for women there. Had been like a huge fan of Geert Wilders, who's a far right anti-Muslim politician in the Netherlands. Had been a fan of Elon Musk, Bill Maher, Barry Weiss, lots of anti-Muslim atheist types. So what immediately transpired was that a lot of the pro-Israel people couldn't deal with that kind of cognitive dissonance. They needed this to be a Muslim guy. And so they started saying, oh, this is something called taqiyya, like where Muslims lie to, and like no Muslim I know has even heard of this. It's like, again, the few who do like are like, that's not even what that means at all. So they were like trying to claim that he was running some like decades long deceit on the government of Germany in order to get asylum, but he was actually a secret extremist Muslim. So anyway, that was a long spiel, but
No, and I think you nailed it. Yeah, from what I understand, he came in 2006, so he had been in the country for 18 years at that point. He's a psychiatrist. He's vehemently anti-Muslim, but he had grown to be also anti-German government. He hated apparently the liberal government. Because he thought that they were basically letting in too many Muslims, and they were not sympathetic enough to the plight of women coming out of Saudi Arabia who apparently were trying to leave Islam. So they were applying as these kind of refugees, basically like religious refugees, right? Which apparently Germany doesn't recognize. So he was like really ticked about that. And so the guy's clearly, so my guess is that he actually wanted to take his anger out on what he saw as liberal Germans, right?
That's what I understood from the
Right,
evidence.
yeah.
That he was like, you guys are too pro-Muslim immigration. And this,
which
of
is just the thinking of a crazy man, right? These are the actions of a crazy man, obviously.
Right.
These are the reasonings of a
Right.
crazy man.
Right.
Yeah, no, but you nailed it. And we saw that it was wild because, I mean, it hit Twitter like a firebomb. Most importantly, because as soon as it happened, you had Elon Musk tweeting out in support of the AfD, which is Germany's kind of far right.
Anti-immigration.
Very highly anti-immigration, but also extremely pro-Israel at the same time, which is kind of weird when you really think about how these immigrants come to Germany.
Yeah.
So, like, I don't actually know how that works for them. I don't know how they square that in their heads.
Well, they don't. They just want Arabs to die, right?
Right.
They're like, we'll
that's
just
the
kill you.
unspoken thing.
You can't
Right.
escape. You can't live here. That's
Right.
That's in the end what it is. But I mean, so I admit that I haven't like had the time to look through everything very carefully, but I've seen some evidence that Elon Musk closed his Twitter account, the guy's Twitter account, not his own Twitter account, for like 12 to 24 hours, deleted all the like Zionist, pro-Israel, anti-Muslim tweets, and then opened it back up. And now I saw this morning he was tweeting, when the legacy media tells you this guy is a Muslim, they're lying to you. Like, what? And now you are acting like the legacy media that you're criticizing.
Right.
So I don't even know.
So I don't know. So I saw that. I went to the guy's thing. I clicked trans. So one thing is he wrote just in Arabic.
Arabic, yeah.
I don't think he wrote. So if you're searching in English, which I don't speak Arabic. I can't write Arabic. If you type in just like Israel, it's not going to come up, right?
Yeah.
But when I went and translated a couple things, there was some pretty pro-Zionist stuff on there. So I think the easiest way to discern that would have been to just look at the total tweets that he had, and then prior, because that's what they did with Luigi Mangione.
Right.
And there was like one tweet. I guess somebody said there was one tweet difference, but yeah. So I don't know. I was telling you earlier, but I just don't really get too much into. I try not to like glean too much from these like lone wolf things, because people are crazy,
Yeah.
And I don't ever actually try to formulate any kind of real policy off of the actions of a lone wolf. If I did that, then I'd probably be the most anti 2A person on the planet. But in fact, I'm super pro 2A.
That's unfortunately, I'm like that. And then it sort of stuns me how people take these sort of individual issues and then make these, policies. And the same thing with the Louis Mangione. Like, I'm just like, why would we draw huge conclusions based on about like policy or anything? Like, they're insane people in the world. Unfortunately, sometimes they're going to do insane things and people will get hurt. That's just the way living in the world works. I wish it didn't, but and so I don't like to get sucked into this on the one hand, because I'm like, it really shouldn't matter if this guy was a Muslim. Even if he was a Muslim, that doesn't justify doing, what we're doing what Israel is doing in Gaza with the US enabling it. It's not the reason that we should limit immigration or Europe should limit immigration. There are reasons. I'm actually not so super pro immigration. I understand why these countries want to preserve their cultures, but like whether or not this guy's a Muslim, that shouldn't serve the basis for policy.
Right.
But nevertheless, I'm torn because I see how these things start to form a narrative and how they're used. And so this he was a Muslim, therefore this shows why Islam is such a problem, and why Israel is righteous because they're fighting Islam. So yeah,
right. What's so funny is that he was actually the quote unquote the kind of Muslim that they love, right? Because he's ex-Muslim. He's like, he's really outspoken. He would be like their token, right? That they would put up and they'd show him off, just like old boy that was the son of one of the Hamas founders and whatnot. The crazy one, the one that's like
Hamas
always on. Yeah, like the one that always looks like he's like coked out,
Yeah.
He's same thing. They love to hold that one up. So, and again, just crazy people who sometimes maybe even make a good point every now and then. But when you translate that into hurting innocent people, it doesn't matter what conflict it is. You're either evil or you are certifiable. One of the two. So
right. Well, speaking of certifiable, another one of the most interesting pieces of news this week over the weekend so far was the Kay Granger is her name. She's a representative from
Texas 12. Yep.
Why don't you give the summary?
So Kay Granger is a congressional representative, a Republican from the 12th District of Texas. She got elected initially in 1996, so she has been in Congress for 28 years. She was the chair of the House Appropriations Committee, which is one of the power committees in the House. It's where all the budgets start. That's where all the government spending starts. So she gets appointed to the chairmanship in 2023 when the Republicans first take over. She's there for about a year, and then she kind of abruptly steps down, and it was very odd. She just announces, in October 2023, she announced she was not going to run again, and then in March 2024, she says, I'm stepping down. Well, so I don't know, she's old. She's like 81 years old. People don't think too much of it. Well, then she goes missing in July. July 24th was the last time she cast a vote in the House of Representatives. And then someone, a reporter in her district, she's out of Dallas, Fort Worth area, gets tipped off that she is living and has been residing in a memory care home since July, when she was found in her neighborhood wandering the streets alone and confused. So it turns out, this reporter goes to this memory care facility. They confirm that she is a resident there. This woman, this sitting congresswoman, has just disappeared off the face of the earth, basically, for the last 6 months, has not been present for a single vote. Republicans only have like a 3-seat majority.
Right.
So she's missed all of the votes. And no one in her office disclosed this to anyone. They were just going to wait it out, and then had this report not come about, they would have switched over in January 6th, I think it is, or January 3rd, and never thought anything of it. But no, we have sitting members of Congress with Alzheimer's.
This has to be unprecedented, right? Like someone
Well,
actually...
I mean, it is and it's not, because the White House apparently is serving as a memory care facility as well at
I
this
was going to
point.
say, there might be more of our government actually who is in cognitive decline versus has their faculties.
When this broke, and I was furious. I was so angry about this because I was angry with Dianne Feinstein, and she actually did the same thing. She had a big fall. She went and lived at a quote unquote rehab center for like 6 or 7 months, which was actually again a memory care facility. Yeah. Then when they had a close vote, they wheeled her in, and I don't know if you remember, she looked like death. You know, she was just there, and her daughter famously said, "She's not here to chat, she's just here to vote."
Oh my God.
And it's despicable. But someone tweeted at me, apparently in 2017, not apparently, this did happen, PBS ran an article where a pharmacist at a compound pharmacy in Washington, in D.C., kind of blew the whistle about all of these congressmen, people in Congress,
octogenarians,
being prescribed Alzheimer's medicines.
Oh my God.
That it was multiple representatives. You know, this is a problem. This is a problem across the spectrum. It is bipartisan. Both sides do it. Everyone is so caught up with their, beating the other side, beating the other team, that they don't police their own. And so this is how we end up with just, decrepit, cognitively absent representatives who are puppets, and we have no clue who is pulling their strings.
Right. I was going to say, part of what I think it exemplifies is the fact that, these people have a stranglehold on this country's politics, and it doesn't actually matter, who the front men are. And that's the most upsetting thing. I mean, and Joe Biden, everybody with half a brain knows that man can't, formulate policy or read a book. Definitely not reading Rashid Khalidi's 100-year war on Palestine, despite the photo op. So, I mean, it's really troubling, and I think it goes to show. I mean, the other thing it shows is that our policies are just outdated. They're, these people have not come to grips with the modern world. They're still living in this, the Holocaust. We have to give the Jews everything they want. We can't ever look at anything Israel does critically because the Holocaust. And it's been, 80 plus years, and I'm sorry, but we need to start looking more critically.
That becomes 9/11, whether it be the Holocaust, 9/11, these tragic events, the Iranian hostage crisis, even Tiananmen Square is another one. These are tragic events, but they're also singular events in history, and they should never actually be used to formulate public policy today, especially events that actually did not happen on our soil whatsoever, and we had nothing to do with whatsoever, such as Tiananmen Square, and then of course the Holocaust. But what was I going to say? Something that people get really upset with me, they say, we need to change the law. And I just think, no, we actually just need to hold our representatives. We shouldn't need a law for this. They should have the honor and respect enough for the office to step down at the age of 65, maybe 68. And it used to be that way. Like, people just dying in office didn't used to actually be a thing up until about the 90s. And then all of a sudden, maybe like the 80s, I would say, all of a sudden it just became a career politician for everyone, and now their only solution is we have to make a new law. No, we need to shame these people.
I was gonna say, I was gonna ask you what your solution was, and I'm kind of against like age limits. I mean, there are lots of people who are in their 80s, even 90s, that I know who are very mentally acute. I don't think they should necessarily be deprived of, the ability to perform their jobs, regardless of their age. But a lot of people that age are not. So I kind of think that the solution lies at the ballot box. But, then again, politics in this country are so corrupt that.
So I'm actually against anyone in their 80s or 90s serving whatsoever, because I think at the end of the day, they still do have to be cognizant of the fact that they are at the end of their life cycle. And I don't think it's fair for them to be making policy that will be inflicted on people who they're just not going to have to live with the decisions that they're making, And so I do think that
that's a good point. That's a good point.
It needs to be left to younger people. I actually think when you leave office, you should still have about 20 years of life left in you. Mitch McConnell probably doesn't have 5 years of life left in him.
Well, I know. So why do you think? I mean, why don't these people want to end their lives like spending their time with grandkids and going on cruises? And what is this obsession with like clinging to power? Is that what it is?
Well, I think these people have sacrificed their personal lives for their careers. And they actually don't have
they
much
don't have
of
them.
Right.
That's sad, yeah.
Right, it is a bit sad, but it's also on the party. So these people, there's a way that they manipulate the system. So political parties that operate at the state level, they are not allowed to interfere in your politics, or in primaries. Right? So what happens is that the people, like somebody like Mitch McConnell, right? He's never going to get a real primary challenge, even though it should be an even footing, right? He should, if somebody wants to challenge him, right? It should be at the equal footing. But what happens is, and I've actually seen the state office do this, I've seen it with my own two eyes, they'll come in and they will basically tell a serious primary challenger, we will not back you. If you go up against him and you win, we will not back you. And so most people, if you're not incredibly wealthy, they just they say okay, and they just drop out. And I've seen this happen twice with the state party of North Carolina, but it happens across the board, and it's in Democrats and Republicans. And so these state parties are actually the ones who are pulling the strings, but really they're the ones running defense for these career politicians like, a Tom Tillis or a Mitch McConnell, Ted Cruz, or somebody like that. And that's why it's so hard to win a primary.
Right.
And so
yeah, the rot runs so deep, I don't even know how to go about like even thinking about fixing it, let alone actually fixing it.
I have so many ideas, but the problem is that you have to get people really psyched up.
Yeah.
And what I've found is that people get psyched up about replacing the other guy. They actually, even though it's interesting, because there was a survey once, it was maybe a year ago, that was done by Pew, and I thought this was so fascinating, was that Democrats, of course, hated Republicans, but for the most part, they really liked their own representatives. Whereas Republicans hated Democrats, but they almost hated their own Republican representatives with equal vigor. It was just a slight difference. And yet, when pressed about finding someone, voting in a new primary, over half said no, they hated them, but they would still stick with them. So wow. I don't know how you fix that.
Yeah, me neither. Anyway.
Some people just like to bitch, to be quite honest with you.
Let's move on to Panama Canal.
Okay, so we're going to move to the Panama Canal, and I'm going to try not to bore the crap out of you guys on this, because I tested it on my family, and they were not impressed. So a couple days ago, Donald Trump tweets out that if Panama doesn't start acting right and start charging fair fees for passage through the Panama Canal, we were going to raid them. We weren't going to take their crap anymore, and we were coming down there with our military, and we're going to take back our damn canals, essentially what he said. And, which is kind of funny.
Because we own the Panama Canal, apparently, until, what was it? like the
We
90s?
did. I started digging in it, right? Because it just seemed like such a weird fight to pick. And I was actually really surprised at what I found. There's actually there is some legitimacy, I think, to his complaints, which, I mean, Trump. And he's,
Yeah.
I don't want to say he's making a mountain out of a molehill, but he's known to make a mountain out of a molehill. So so what happened is in 1903, Colombia owns Panama. There's a revolution. Anyways, the French were involved somehow, and there was this kind of ambassador from France who was involved with Panama, and he signs the treaty for the U.S. to build the canal, right? And he signs away the rights to the land in Panama. And this was extremely controversial at the time because the Panamanian government didn't approve of the treaty whatsoever. And they were new, so they were pretty weak. So we just kind of muscled in and took it, right? And we built it. We paid for it. We built it. We spent 6,000 American lives building it.
Wow.
And it was really this great engineering feat, right? So it connects the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans, and it makes trade significantly easier. Cuts out weeks and weeks of travel down around the all of South America. So, anyways, flash forward. So this becomes kind of like a flashpoint because this Frenchman who had not at the time lived in Panama for like 17 years, when he signed away their rights to the canal to the U.S., which is just crazy. The Panamanians, they kind of get back up on their feet, and by the 60s, they're pissed, right? And they're like, no,
Yeah.
we want control of this. And they recognize the strategic, the geopolitical importance of their land, obviously. We get it, right? So it starts to become a thing. There's a couple coups in Panama. And then finally in the 70s, it kind of comes to a head. And Jimmy Carter is the one who has to deal with it. What was interesting to find out was during the 1976 election, when Ronald Reagan ran in the primary against Gerald Ford, Ford was for a new treaty with Panama, and then Reagan was staunchly against it, right?
Wow.
Reagan was an exceptionalist, American exceptionalist. And Ford was more like New Age Republicans. Anyways, regardless, Carter wins, and he comes up with a new plan. And what happened is we signed the control of the Panama Canal back over to Panama. But what we did was we signed a neutrality agreement, a neutrality treatment, or a treaty, which is really important because what it stipulated was that the Panama Canal must always remain neutral to the United States, right? So, and if at any time another country, another party tries to come in and take control, we then reserve the right to militarily intervene. Okay, so flash forward into the early 2000s, the Chinese want to come in and they want to expand the canal, right? And everyone agrees that the canal actually does need to be expanded because there are some really large cargo ships that can't fit. It's a lock system. I don't know if you know how that works. Do you know how locks work?
I do not.
I actually took this really, really boring boat trip with my parents one time up in the locks in Michigan, and I learned all about it. But so it's kind of like a dam system where they draw the water out, and then as one is coming in, and then they flood the lock, so it brings the boat up, and it's able to pass, and then they'll flood it out. So they need a lot of water pressure. They need a lot of water. And only the size of the ship matters. So the Chinese are like, we want to invest, and actually a lot of people invest, but the Chinese invest more than anyone at about $2 billion. This is part of their Belt and Road Initiative, right? And lots of people know about that in Africa and whatnot. It's been very controversial with the U.S. So, anyways, what happens is that they get this expansion in. So there's a northbound and a southbound lane, right? So the northbound lane is from China to America. Southbound lane is coming from America to China, essentially. And everything's going kind of fine, but the Chinese are running a couple of the ports, which is already contentious with the U.S. But then in 2003, there's this terrible drought in Panama. It's the worst on record. I think the second worst on record. And so there's that water that I was talking about that they needed to bring the boats up to level so they can pass, it's not there. So they have to limit the number of boats that they can have passing through the canal. So what happens is they institute a auction for slots, right? So normally about 40 boats travel each way, and they each day, and they limit it down to 18. And the Panamanians start auctioning off these slots. A handful of them, I think it was like 6 a day, right? Well, the amount it costs to run through the canal suddenly goes from anywhere from about $35,000 to $100,000 all the way up to anywhere from $400,000 to $1 million.
Wow.
But certain slots even went for over 2, 3, and I think they had a record at $4 million to cross, right? So the Panamanians are like, holy crap, this is the gold mine, right? So the water comes back. 2004, they have a normal rainy season. Things are getting better, but the Panamanians are like not going to give up this auction slots that they had, the system that they have. So now coming into 2025, they have instituted a new system, right, for auctioning off 4 slots coming from America to the US or to China, but 5 slots coming from China to the US. So they're giving the Chinese an advantage in this auction system. So they are essentially breaking the neutrality agreement, the neutrality treaty that they have signed with the US. And, I know a lot of people, a lot of anti-imperialists, a lot of anti-American people are going to say, well, they were kind of forced into that treaty to begin with. I'm still really hardcore pro-America, and I think at the end of the day, they signed it nonetheless, and they signed it without a gun to their heads. And they have to honor this.
So what should they do? I mean, in your opinion?
Donald Trump is right in that they are being extortionists in the way that they are handling this. And it is bad for American business, especially when apparently they've realized how much power they have and how much money they can squeeze out of our cargo. No, they need to return to, and I don't know, because again, it's the only canal of its kind.
Would you consider it a fair solution if they said 5 and 5? Or do you want them to return to it's the auction
definitely
system?
5 and 5.
Yeah.
I could see though, of course I'm not for military intervention, so I could see the U.S. government supplementing cargo ships for going around, and bypassing, encouraging using. I would actually be for using. We give the Panamanian government $600 million a year, which is significantly more than what the Chinese have given them. So maybe taking away some of that aid and then giving it to American businesses to offset the travel around. And I do think that that's a way that they could work within a diplomatic region, to say, hey, no, you're not going to take advantage of us. And we have been giving you billions and billions of dollars over the years.
What are the direct effects for Americans on this? Does it make consumer products more expensive? Yeah. What kind of products?
So it's going to make consumer products more expensive. It's actually going to make scarcity because the ships, they have to wait to get into these slots. So the capacity has gone up it's gone up pretty well. I think it's right back to pre-2023 levels, maybe just a little bit below, but it definitely slows things down. And so, but again, it impacts inflation, stuff like that.
Right. I mean, if the ships have to pay so much to go through, doesn't that mean that they have to raise the prices?
Right. Yeah. And when you're talking, $4 million added on to the price of a cargo ship, it's I mean, it's pretty
That's
crazy.
A lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
Are there specific kinds of goods that are on these ships? Are there specific things that Americans should look for that are being affected by this, or
basically anything coming from China that's headed for the East Coast? Yeah. And so the other option, of course, would be to land at the port in LA or San Francisco, but they have their own issues. Of course, the entire state of California is just batshit insane with their semi trucks. What they're trying to do with large cargo out there, with their train system getting robbed by bandits. It's much more ideal to come through the Panama Canal and then port in New Orleans, which again, all of our produce coming from the East Coast and the South, coming out of New Orleans, going to Asia, and not just China, but you got Vietnam, you have Malaysia in there, you have a lot of other big cities, India, right, and whatnot. They're going to come through there, and the Panama Canal is actually really kind of a marvel in a way, and it's something that we really do take for granted. That we were able to accomplish. I don't know. I mean, I'm not one of these like anti-American people. I do think that we actually have done some good. I know there are people who don't like the canal and whatnot, but for the most part, it actually is kind of a marvel. And we should, if there were ever a military intervention that I would support, which there are very few, I don't know if I would. It would take a lot. Right.
Yeah.
But it would certainly be much more in our interest than, say, militarily intervening in Syria or Libya or Iraq or literally anywhere in the Middle East.
That's for sure. Well, let's hope it doesn't come to that.
Right.
And I have a feeling they'll figure something out. But
right. Hopefully, but it is interesting because the Chinese they're pretty dug in. Apparently now they control not just one but two ports on their side. Which is the south side.
Let's hope this is not what starts the war with China.
Right. I'm like, how about we just get out of their hemisphere? And I am not a protectionist of Taiwan. I could have a whole conversation about that. But then we kick them out of ours as well, Yeah. Well, we will definitely be keeping track of this story for future episodes, and assuming things continue to develop, which it sounds like they probably will, because it doesn't seem like a problem that'll solve itself. We'll discuss it on future episodes. So definitely,
Thank you so much for joining us, and Merry Christmas, Happy
Merry
Holidays.
Christmas to everyone. Yes, and thank you for joining. Okay. Bye.